Imagine digging in your backyard and finding a pristine, modern smartphone buried right next to a fossilized T-Rex footprint. Okay, maybe it wasn't quite that extreme, but in the meticulous world of archaeology, finding an artifact that fundamentally breaks the established timeline of human history produces the exact same kind of shockwave. It forces us to stop, take a step back, and ask, what if everything we thought we knew about the timeline of ancient human ingenuity is completely wrong? Picture this. The year is 2008. A dedicated team of Russian archaeologists is working in the freezing, remote Altai Mountains of Siberia. They are painstakingly excavating a massive, vaulted limestone chamber, known as Denisova Cave. This cave is an absolute goldmine for prehistory, a place where ancient humans sought shelter from the brutal, howling Ice Age winters for hundreds of thousands of years. The team is sifting through a specific layer of dirt, a stratum known to date back roughly 40 to 50,000 years. They expect to find the usual suspects of the Paleolithic era: some crude, chipped stone tools, animal bones with butchery marks, maybe a few rudimentary bone beads if they are having a really lucky day. But then, a researcher brushes away the dark, compacted earth and uncovers a flash of deep, brilliant green. It catches the dim light of the cave perfectly. It's not a rough stone or a piece of animal debris. It is a fragment of jewelry. Specifically, it's a piece of a beautifully curved stone bracelet. Now, finding jewelry from 40,000 years ago is rare, but not entirely unheard of. But this wasn't some primitive seashell necklace or a crude pendant chipped from a mammoth tusk. The object they pulled from the Siberian dirt was a masterclass in craftsmanship. It was carved from a stunning dark green stone called chlorite. The piece was incredibly smooth, polished to a near-mirror finish that would have felt cool and sleek against the skin. Most remarkably, right near the edge of the fragment, there was a hole, a perfectly round, incredibly precise hole drilled straight through the hard, unforgiving stone. When the lead archaeologists first laid eyes on this green bracelet, their immediate reaction was profound skepticism. In fact, the director of the institute examining it initially thought it had to be a mistake. It had to be contamination. Someone must have dropped a piece of relatively modern, maybe Bronze Age jewelry into the trench, or perhaps a burrowing animal pushed it down from a newer layer of dirt above. Because according to every textbook ever written, the technology required to make this object, the high-speed drilling, the advanced polishing techniques, the sheer intuitive understanding of material science, simply did not exist 40,000 years ago. It wouldn't exist for another 30,000 years, not until the Neolithic period, when humans settled down, started farming, and had the time to develop complex workshops. Finding this perfectly polished, precisely drilled bracelet in Ice Age dirt was the equivalent of finding a medieval knight wearing a digital watch. It was an impossible artifact, an absolute anachronism that threatened to rewrite the timeline of human cognitive development. But as the scientists subjected the soil, the surrounding artifacts, and the bracelet itself to rigorous, cutting-edge dating techniques, the impossible became undeniable. The soil layers were totally undisturbed. The dating was incredibly accurate. This pristine, highly engineered piece of jewelry truly was created over 40 millennia ago. This revelation immediately sparked a burning, almost uncomfortable question within the scientific community. If this wasn't made by advanced, modern humans from a much later era, then who on earth made it? Who was sitting in a freezing Siberian cave, in the shadow of roaming woolly mammoths and cave lions, executing advanced jewel crafting? To answer that, we have to look away from the bracelet for just a moment and look at another, much smaller discovery made in that exact same cave. A discovery that was about to introduce the world to a literal ghost species of humanity. We always like to think of our own species, Homo sapiens, as the sole pioneers of art, technology, and sophisticated culture. We picture our direct ancestors marching out of Africa, armed with superior brains, leaving the less evolved, brutish cavemen in the dust. But the makers of the greenstone bracelet were about to completely shatter that arrogant, self-centered illusion. They weren't us, and they weren't Neanderthals either. To understand exactly who crafted this masterpiece, we have to look at another artifact pulled from the exact same layer of dirt in Denisova Cave. But unlike the beautifully polished green stone, this object was incredibly easy to miss. It was a tiny, unassuming fragment of a pinky finger bone. This little piece of bone belonged to a young girl who lived, and tragically died, in that freezing Siberian cave tens of thousands of years ago. On the surface, a broken pinky bone doesn't look like much. But inside that bone, locked away in the cellular nucleus, was a biological time capsule perfectly preserved by the frigid temperatures of the Altai Mountains. In 2010, scientists at the Max Planck Institute in Germany managed to extract DNA from this tiny fossil. Now, you have to understand, sequencing DNA from something that old is a monumental task. It is like trying to reconstruct a massive 10,000-page encyclopedia that has been put through a paper shredder, soaked in mud, and then scattered in a hurricane. But the geneticists managed to piece the genetic puzzle together. And when they finally read the results, their jaws hit the floor. The genetic signature didn't match modern humans. And surprisingly, it didn't match Neanderthals either, who were known to be wandering around Eurasia at the time. This pinky bone belonged to a completely distinct, previously undiscovered branch of the human family tree. Because the first evidence of their existence was found in Denisova cave, scientists named this brand new human species the Denisovans. Finding the Denisovans was one of the most significant archaeological breakthroughs of the 21st century. We suddenly realized we were sharing the planet with a ghost species. Think about that for a second. Imagine a world where you don't just share the Earth with different cultures or nationalities, but with entirely different kinds of humans. The wild part is that, physically, the Denisovans are still ghosts. We have almost no physical fossils of them. If you gathered every confirmed Denisovan bone ever found, a few massive teeth, a piece of a jawbone, a skull fragment, and that pinky bone, they would all easily fit inside a single shoebox. Yet, their DNA tells a massive, sprawling story. We know they ranged all the way from the freezing mountains of Siberia down to the tropical islands of Southeast Asia. We know they were incredibly robust, surviving in high-altitude environments, where the air was thin and the winters were utterly unforgiving. For decades, popular culture has painted ancient hominins as grunting, simple-minded brutes who dragged clubs and barely knew how to keep a fire going. The Denisovans completely shatter that myth. They were highly adaptable, deeply intelligent, and successful enough to survive for hundreds of thousands of years. In fact, they were so closely related to us that when our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens, migrated out of Africa and bumped into the Denisovans in Asia, we actually interbred with them. They passed down genetic cheat codes to us. Have you ever wondered how modern Tibetan populations and Sherpas can comfortably live and breathe at extreme altitudes that would leave the rest of us gasping for air and suffering from altitude sickness? That is a direct result of Denisovan DNA. Our ancestors essentially downloaded a biological software update from them to survive the mountains. This completely changes how we view the ancient world. We weren't the only smart kids on the block. The Denisovans were complex. They were resilient, and most importantly for our story, they possessed a capacity for imagination and engineering that we never, ever expected. Because these mountain-dwelling ghosts of the Ice Age were the ones sitting in that limestone cave, holding pieces of raw, green chlorite. This flips the entire script on what we thought ancient, non-sapiens minds were capable of. The sheer existence of the Denisovans is mind-bending. But to truly appreciate just how far ahead of their time these ancient cousins were, we have to look past the DNA. We have to look closely at the green bracelet itself. Much closer. We need to put it under a microscope and look at the physical, microscopic scars left behind by its mysterious creator. When scientists finally put this fractured piece of jewelry under a high-powered electron microscope, they weren't just looking at a pretty rock anymore. They were looking at a prehistoric crime scene, hunting for the forensic fingerprints of a master craftsman. And what the microscopic scars revealed was a technological marvel that simply shouldn't exist in the Ice Age. First, consider the raw material itself. The bracelet is carved from a specific type of stone called chlorite. It is undeniably gorgeous, boasting a deep, rich, translucent emerald color that absorbs light beautifully. But it has a fatal flaw. It is incredibly fragile. On the Mohs scale of mineral hardness, chlorite ranks very low. If you strike it with another rock, it doesn't break into clean, workable chunks. It shatters into useless, dusty splinters. You absolutely cannot apply standard caveman techniques here. You can't just forcefully chip away at chlorite like you would a piece of flint or obsidian to make a spearhead. Working with this stone requires an incredibly delicate approach, demanding a level of finesse and forward thinking we rarely associate with early hominins. The most jaw-dropping feature of the bracelet, the part that truly breaks the timeline, is that perfectly round hole near the edge. When researchers zoomed in on the inside walls of this hole, they didn't find the random, jagged scratch marks you would expect if someone had just aggressively twisted a sharp piece of bone into the rock. Instead, they found distinct, tight, concentric microstriations. Why is that little detail so earth-shattering? Because it is undeniable proof that the hole wasn't simply scraped out over months of tedious labor. It was drilled. And not just drilled, but drilled with a tool that was spinning incredibly fast. The Denisovan craftsmen utilized high-speed rotational drilling. Let that sink in for a second. Someone, sitting in a Siberian cave 40,000 years ago, effectively invented a rudimentary power tool. Scientists believe they must have used something akin to a bow drill. Picture a straight stick acting as the drill bit, perhaps tipped with a slurry of abrasive sand. Now, wrap a string around that stick and attach the ends to a curved wooden bow. By rapidly sawing the bow back and forth, the drill bit spins at incredibly high speeds, grinding seamlessly into the stone. But here is the real kicker, the detail that elevates this from clever tool use to genius-level engineering. To drill through fragile chlorite at high speeds without the entire piece vibrating and shattering, the drill bit couldn't wobble, not even a fraction of a millimeter. It required immense, unwavering mechanical stability. The maker couldn't have just held the stone in one hand and operated the drill with the other. They had to have built some sort of stationary easel, a rigid support system to hold the drill perfectly straight and apply completely even pressure. That is a pure engineering mindset at work. And the technological wizardry didn't stop when the hole was finished. Think about the outer surface of the bracelet. It is shockingly smooth, reflecting light almost like modern glass. The microscopic evidence shows a sophisticated multi-stage polishing process. If you walk into a modern lapidary shop today, professionals use a series of progressively finer sanding belts to get a flawless mirror finish on gemstones. The Denisovans executed the exact same concept entirely off the grid. They likely started with a coarse abrasive, like crushed pebbles and water, to patiently grind down the heavy curve. Once the shape was locked in, they stepped down to finer materials like silt or clay. Finally, to achieve that brilliant shine, they buffed the stone, using supple, tanned animal hides, much like using a chamois cloth to polish a sports car today. This level of dedication is staggering. The immense patience required to not accidentally snap the stone at the very last second of polishing is a breathtaking achievement. We are talking about Stone Age high-tech, executed by the flickering light of a campfire while woolly rhinos and cave lions roamed outside. But seeing this sheer effort forces us to ask an entirely different kind of question. You don't spend dozens of hours inventing a high-speed drill and meticulously polishing a fragile green stone just to leave it sitting in the dirt. This was an item of immense social value. It was meant to be worn, meant to be seen. But how exactly was it used? And what secrets was that perfectly engineered little hole hiding? To figure that out, researchers had to look even closer at the microscopic wear and tear. And what they found hanging from that bracelet changes everything. When researchers peered into the microscopic depths of that perfectly drilled hole, they weren't just looking at the marks of a tool. They were looking at the daily habits of a ghost. Inside the rim of that tiny opening, the electron microscope revealed a distinct asymmetrical pattern of heavy, glossy polishing. This wasn't a byproduct of the high-speed drill bit that created the hole. This was post-production wear and tear. It was the undeniable physical signature of friction. Something heavy had been threaded through that hole, and it had been constantly rubbing against the delicate green stone for a very long time. By studying the exact angle and depth of the wear, scientists reconstructed what was missing. Imagine a thick, supple cord, likely made from tightly braided animal sinew or treated leather, looped through the chlorite. But the wear was far too pronounced for this to just be a simple decorative string. The friction indicated that this leather strap was load-bearing. Hanging from that cord, dangling freely against the green stone, was a secondary object. It might have been a beautifully carved piece of bone, the gleaming canine tooth of a cave lion, or perhaps another polished gemstone. We are quite literally looking at a 40,000-year-old, custom-made charm bracelet. But the forensic intimacy of this artifact goes even deeper. By analyzing the microscopic scratching across the entire outer surface, and studying exactly where the pristine polish had been subtly dulled, experts could determine precisely how this jewelry was worn on the body. The microscopic scratches dictate that it lived on a right arm, and it wasn't tucked away in a fur pouch or saved only for special ceremonies. It was worn consistently. The subtle, continuous abrasions tell a silent story of a right-handed individual going about their daily Ice Age life. Picture them gesturing around a fire, gathering plants, or pointing across the Siberian tundra, all while this heavy, vibrant green jewel constantly brushed against their skin and their fur clothing. This right here is the climax of our prehistoric mystery. This is the moment we have to stop looking at the bracelet as just an interesting piece of ancient rock, and start looking at what it actually represents for the evolution of the human mind. For decades, the prevailing, almost arrogant dogma in anthropology was that only our species, Homo sapiens, possessed the cognitive hardware for true symbolic thought. The classic narrative was that other ancient humans, like the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, were hyper-focused pragmatists. We assumed their brains were too occupied with the grim reality of just trying not to freeze or starve to care about anything else. We thought they only made practical, utilitarian things. A sharp rock to cut meat. A spark to make fire. In that outdated view, survival was the only game in town. But this brilliant green bracelet shatters that assumption into a million pieces. Think about it. You cannot eat a chlorite bracelet. It will not keep you warm during a brutal Siberian blizzard. It will not help you bring down a woolly rhinoceros. In terms of pure, biological, day-to-day survival, this object is completely and utterly useless. So why spend dozens of hours inventing high-speed drills and risking the destruction of fragile stone just to make it? They made it for the exact same reasons we wear Rolex watches, diamond engagement rings, or designer clothes today. Status, identity, vanity, art. This green stone was a prehistoric flex. The vibrant, translucent color of chlorite is extremely rare in the rugged Altai Mountains. The material itself had to be sourced from miles away, brought back to the cave, and then transformed through staggering effort. Whoever wore this bracelet was signaling something deeply complex to everyone who saw them. Maybe they were a revered tribal leader. Maybe they were a powerful shaman. Or maybe they were simply someone who had amassed enough social wealth that they didn't have to spend every waking second hunting for food. They could afford the luxury of time. Time to sit and create art, or time to trade with a dedicated master craftsman who did. The sheer existence of this object implies a society with a division of labor. It implies a prehistoric world where people had free time, where they profoundly valued aesthetics, and where they understood the abstract concept of prestige. The Denisovan who wore this bracelet wasn't some grunting, unfeeling savage shivering in the dark. They were a self-aware individual, with an ego, a distinct identity, and a profound appreciation for beauty. They were signaling who they were to the world. In every meaningful psychological metric, the mind behind this green stone was just like ours. And when you truly internalize that fact, when you realize that this towering level of cognitive sophistication and artistic brilliance belonged to an entirely different species of human that vanished completely from the face of the earth, it makes you view the entire timeline of human history through a completely different, almost haunting lens. The Denisovan bracelet is a tiny, fragile window into an alternate reality. A reality where Earth wasn't just home to one kind of intelligent, artistic, status-obsessed human, but several. We often view human evolution as a single, straight road leading directly to us, the undisputed champions of the world. We look at our towering skyscrapers, our smartphones, and our space stations, and we pat ourselves on the back for being the inevitable pinnacle of progress. but the brilliant green dust left behind in Denisova Cave tells a much more complicated, and frankly, much more humbling story. It tells us that ingenuity wasn't our exclusive superpower. Long before our direct ancestors ever figured out how to forge metal or build sprawling cities, another species was already mastering the mechanics of high-speed drilling and the complex chemistry of multi-stage polishing. The Denisovans were looking at raw, unforgiving nature and seeing the potential for pure beauty. They were shaping their world, not just to survive the freezing winds of the Ice Age, but to express themselves. This realization brings a profound sense of melancholy to the story of human history. What exactly happened to them? Why did a species so advanced, so highly adaptable, and so incredibly smart completely vanish from the physical fossil record? Was it a violently shifting climate they just couldn't adapt to in time? Was it a devastating ancient disease? Or, more darkly, did they ultimately lose a brutal competition for resources against a newly arrived, rapidly expanding wave of Homo sapiens? The truth is, we still don't know exactly why the Denisovan fires finally went out. But the fascinating part is that they didn't disappear entirely. They live on in the DNA of billions of people today. Millions of people are walking around modern cities right now, carrying high-altitude adaptations and ancient immune system boosts directly inherited from these mountain-dwelling ghosts. Their genetic legacy is still actively shaping the modern world, quietly whispering through our bloodlines. And that makes you stop and wonder about the future. If a population of master craftsmen could thrive for hundreds of thousands of years, spread across an entire continent, and then slip so completely into the shadows of history that we only found them by accident in a single, broken pinky bone, what does that say about us? What pieces of our modern, hyper-connected world will actually survive 40,000 years into the future? Will a future archaeologist dig up a corroded fragment of a smartwatch, brush away the dirt, and marvel at our primitive, yet surprisingly clever craftsmanship? The Denisovan greenstone bracelet forces us to completely rethink our place in the universe. It reminds us that the story of humanity is far older, far weirder, and far more diverse than any textbook ever prepared us for. The next time you look down at a watch, a ring, or a simple piece of jewelry on your own wrist, take a single second to think about that prehistoric master craftsman. Picture them sitting in a freezing Siberian cave, slowly and deliberately spinning a wooden bow drill, carving out their own unique identity in the stone. We might be the very last humans left standing on this planet, but we were absolutely not the first ones to look at a simple rock and see a masterpiece waiting to be born. What do you think is the most surprising part of the Denisovan story? Do you think there are entirely new, undiscovered human species still waiting to be found deep in the ice or buried in the dirt? Let me know your best theories down in the comments below. If you enjoyed diving into this prehistoric mystery with me, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep questioning the past, and I'll see you in the next video.